It's just quiet, and there's a lot of solitude. I love it. At any rate, so I'm Ross Strigley. I am the director of Plant Select. I am a native of Colorado, and back in the 90s, I went to school for biology and met somebody there who had a gardening business, and I bought his business. And so he was my mentor into horticulture. When I graduated, I got a job at a lab, and I didn't like that. I like being outside. So I bought his business, and it wasn't much. And I knew all the customers already. So I started on that avenue. And for anybody who's out there who's doing plants as sort of a business, keep going. It's the best industry you could ever have. And you never know where you end up. I think most people in this industry find themselves here instead of actually trying to arrive here. Anyway, I did work at CSU on facilities for a little bit, and I also worked 7 years down at Denver Botanic Gardens. And then I worked for Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery as outside sales associate, selling their native trees and shrubs. And then I got this position, and I gotta say, I love it. And I think that I'm probably the best person for the job, just because back in '97, I was around when Plant Select came out, and I remember planting these plants. So in the old days, how you found new, unique plants, you would go to your nursery or your garden center and build a relationship with people that have sort of the same taste as you, and then they would say, you know, hey, you ought to try this. And I started doing that, and they'd say, oh, Plant Select, this is going to be a Plant Select, it's really good. And I put it out in the yard, and I never really thought anything about the brand, but holy smokes, when I started to see how long they bloomed, how tough they were, and my customers' responses to them, that is the kind of plant that we constantly are looking for in the future. It's that wow kind of factor, and we'll go through that. Plant Select was born out of Denver Botanic Gardens and Colorado State University. So my office is actually on Colorado State University. The board members are 6 people, and 2 of them are from Denver Botanic Gardens, 2 of them are from Colorado State, and then 2 of them are from the green industry. And it's really important to know that we need all those factors and those factions to work together, because if you can promote plants, but if nobody's growing them, then there's an issue. You need the sort of the authority behind the studies to say that this is done properly and these are great plants for Colorado. And I think that Colorado is sort of unique in their horticulture and green industry fields, because people are very accepting and very helpful to one another. Colorado's not an easy place to grow plants. We have the freeze thaws. It happens like 30 times every year, and that's so hard on plants. But as we've moved into the future, I actually think that we could probably grow a lot more plants than a lot of the rest of the country. And in the old days, when I was growing up and I call or talk to cousins back east, they'd say, why don't you grow this? Why don't you grow that? And then I would say, well, it's too dry, or my parents would say it's too cold, it's too dry. But now, with a little bit of water, you can actually grow probably a lot more than they can grow back there. So how we select plants, I wanted to just quickly go kind of about the Plant Select with our procedures. So we have committees that on the marketing committee, people that will help with brochures and writing articles and taking photos. And then we also have a propagation committee, and there's where we discuss maybe new plants or found plants. And those are what go into the trial. And then both of those committees will go and evaluate whether or not that plant has the wow factor. Does it thrive in range of conditions? Now, we used to have trials up here at CSU, and then they put a ridiculously big stadium there. But I'm trying to bring the trials back. Instead, what CSU is actually doing for testing is they're doing propagation protocols on some of these more challenging plants to grow. But anyway, we also expect them to flourish with less water. They're tough and resilient in challenging conditions and our climates like ours. And then they're one of a kind or unique, long-lasting beauty and non-invasive and habitat friendly. And that's very important. Also, not weedy. That is a big thing. So there's a big native push these days, and a lot of times Plant Select kind of gets intermingled with native plants, and some people are kind of confused. I actually put up just an Excel spreadsheet on our website. I'll show you where it is, but it identifies the North American natives, and it also identifies the Colorado natives. And we're promoting about 160 plants right now, and we have 76 of them are North American natives, and 84 of them are other steppe climate plants. And I'm kind of subscribed to the idea that diversity is a very good thing, and I am very, very passionate about the fact that we have to save water if we're going to actually save the environment in Colorado. And I think and the Front Range all the way Wyoming and in this steppe region. I'll explain a little more of that as we go on. So that's how plants get into Plant Select. They go through trials, 3-year trials, then they're voted on, they're nominated, we try and build up numbers on them, and then we promote them. So if you go to our website, and you could probably do that right now, there's a plethora of information. Go to our plants, and you can see export plants to Excel. This is the database that will download, and it has everything from zones, color, maintenance schedule, that's a commercial maintenance schedule, elevation guide, everything that you would see when you open up just one of these pictures. It will come up on a whole Excel spreadsheet, and if you're doing searches for shrubs, you can sort them all by then and then start going by color, and it's very quick when you're starting to try and get ideas about what to plant in your yard and get information. So one of the other things that I want to go before we start talking more about Plant Select, when I thought about succession of pollinators, I thought, you know what, this is a good opportunity to talk about succession of landscape styles. Oh my gosh, it kills me all the time when I drive down the street and this is what I see. And number one, this is up in the Aspen Valley, actually. And they put those little double wides there, and then they rocked it all in a tree. That's not sustainable. It's not smart. It's going to cost money because there's always going to be weeds that come in there. We need to evolve from the idea that we need to just lay down a lot of rock and think that it's going to be less maintenance, because it's not. And then in number two, that's just down the street from me. That's kind of this blend where we'll put in these big rock beds, and then we have these drought tolerant plants that are probably getting watered, and then we shear them all the time, even though there's enough space there that they could grow as big as they want. That kind of comes down to planning, and I'm tired of looking at those kinds of landscapes. I like the idea that it's drought tolerant, but the fact that they're probably watering that the same amount of time that they started watering it when it was installed a long time ago. And then number three, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but they're in Greeley. I took this picture on a tour in Greeley, and that is what I think most people consider like they've made it, and that's the trophy home that they've always wanted. Well, the home's great, but the landscape is something that we need to talk about in terms of drought and right plant, right place. So they have a bunch of big sheared junipers, which to me is kind of a waste. You don't need to do that. You can buy smaller junipers, but why would you put them in a lawn, a bluegrass lawn? They don't need any water whatsoever. So you've just increased your work by watering it more, so you have to shear it more. Now, number four is a new idea that I'm really excited about, and we all go through phases, and I'm kind of in this crevice garden phase. This house is actually on Monaco and 28th down in Denver, and there's an artist that lives here, and I tried to meet that person, but they weren't home, so I took pictures of their yard anyway, and they had put this really incredible crevice garden in there in the middle of their lawn. In terms of blooming and pollinators, they have done an incredible job of providing a large space that's going to have plants blooming through the whole year or through the growing season. And that is what you're looking for if you're really interested in pollinators. In terms of water, he's probably watering that whole thing the same as he's doing his lawn, or she. And if they changed out the lawn to maybe something different, then it could be a little bit more water savings with more diversity. And then of course you could just cut out the whole lawn and do a huge crevice garden. But I talked about that just like another week ago, and so I wasn't going to bring those up again just in case somebody else was watching for a second time. This is Kelly Grumman's house. Kelly Grumman's is a phenomenal horticulturist here in Colorado, and he's brought a lot of plants to Plant Select, and he has a great sense of style, and he's very practical. And this might be something in between for a style of a house where he has all his drought tolerant plants in the gravel bed. There's nothing that really needs to be sheared. He treats them once a year, cutting them back or whatever. And then he has dog tough grass, which he waters once a week, and he only mows about 12 times a year. That's a huge savings on water. And so I push it all the time, but it's not the end all be all for plants because it doesn't grow in shade. And that there's a lot of shade in Colorado now. It won't grow under big trees or anything like that. So anyway, that's kind of my preaching about style and how we should go through succession on landscape styles, because we've got to remember where we live. We're in the steppe climate, and we've adopted all these landscapes from the humid continental climate that's to the east of us. So, you know, Greeley average is 14.67 inches per year. And I'm thinking that we should get down to watering once a week, and hopefully people will start watering between 20, you know, ultimately putting on their landscapes only around 20 to 25 inches tops. And it would be great if it would be a lot less, but I think there's a lot of work to be done with discovering what plants are going to do fantastic like that. So this is where I've kind of tucked away the actual meat of this program, where I'm going to, if you're planning a garden, you can actually go to design and then go to downloadable designs. And you can go down to the bottom and you'll see a PDF form that is the Phenology of Bloom Time by Ann Fraser. And she, in the past 5 years, has gone and collected all this data information on when plants were blooming. Because when we put in the brochures and the booklets, when they bloom, that's a kind of a generalization of what everybody knows. There's no hard data. So it's great to see the hard data, because some of those things, if you're looking at the screen right now, there is the top bar right underneath the months. Now that has different shades of pink, and those are geared by weight of the bloom time. The middle PS is where it says May to September. That's where we are kind of saying this is where we've seen it bloom. And then all below is actually the hard data. And this is from Denver. So you can get a good idea of, you know, since the years change and things like that, you can start to see how the hard data is going to be useful, because it goes outside what we actually said. Now, planting your garden, all you have to do for pollinators is go and pick those groups of purple and just line them up across, you know, as you move down your sheet, you want to have the purple move all the way across the year. And that is kind of the idea of this talk. So planting your garden, we'll start with some trees and shrubs and broadleaf evergreens, the anchor plants, herbaceous plants, and then the turf, you know, which for me is just going to be dog tough, and we kind of already talked about that. But remember, right plant, right place. You have all the information on a spreadsheet, whether it's part shade or full sun or however, and the colors. But the bloom time really offers a visualization, because you'll know the color of the plant and how long it's blooming, and you'll be able to see the next plant that's coming on and say, do those colors match, or are they, you know, compatible? So one of the first plants that I thought we'd go is an oldie but a goodie. It's the Hot Wings Tatarian Maple. That was actually discovered here in Fort Collins, at Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery. And I drive around in Greeley, actually. I drove around this spring, and it was just after the COVID had started, and I had to run an errand. That's right, it wasn't too long ago, it was May. And there's a tree there that is at a church in downtown, and I took these pictures. People forget that the maples actually bloom very early, and it actually has clusters of white flowers that bloom all over the entire tree. There's butterflies, there's bees, there's flies, there's little wasps. And then, so you can see down in the lower left-hand corner, you can see when that is blooming in Denver. And in terms of, you know, that's the range. So you'd have those white things. And then what about the samaras? That's really what the character of this tree is for, is those red samaras. They're, or helicopter seeds, they are fantastically red. And, you know, I thought, wow, I wonder, we never really posted up where to see, you know, what the date is for those samaras being in full show. And lo and behold, if you go and log on to Denver Botanic Gardens Navigator, you can search these plants and you'll come up with the, you know, Acer Pterychum hot wings maple. And then you can slide down and look at that. It says the fruiting time. So those, they've actually got a lot more information on these things than I thought that they, well, from what they provided to me on a lot of our plants. But this tells you how long those samaras are hanging on and what they look like. I think that's a really great resource tool. And they do that on all their plants. It's not just Plant Select plants, it's all their plants. So this is that church again, and this is actually the fall color. That is not the samaras. I was driving around, I think this is in October. Normally the hot wings maple gets sort of a mottled burgundy and yellow and orange sorts of colors. And this one, for whatever reason, and the year was right, it was really red and absolutely gorgeous. So this is a really great tree for, it's a small ornamental tree, and I like small ornamental trees, larger, better than actually super large ones. I think they're more appropriate for Colorado personally, and as the person that maintains them, they're easier. They're easier to prune because they're shorter, they're easier to cut down when they're done, or, you know, their end of their lifespan. They're not a $5,000 removal. This one can go to seed if you overwater that area. And so I highly recommend not overwatering it. This is far superior than the most common Genola maple because those are chlorotic in our clay soils. So this one will get, what, 20 feet tall or something and 15 feet wide. And it does come in a multi-stem. I like the multi-stem look a lot as well as a single stem. So then the other tree that if you were choosing for your yard is the sucker punch chokecherry. This was discovered by a friend of Scott's Goger-Bowes who found it in a hedgerow, and it is a Canada red replacement. And basically, it's a native plant, Prunus virginiana, and you can see when it blooms down in the corner early May, and you get all those bees. It's one of the earlier things out, and it's a beautiful plant. It's not super fragrant, but those flowers, they come and go very short. You can see there that 1 month they have it only bloomed for 1 week in May in 2019. But as it blooms, these green leaves appear and they start to grow out. And then after about 2 weeks, those leaves turn from green to purple. And it's a very beautiful, upright, deep burgundy tree that does not sucker. It's very drought tolerant. Last year, I had one planted in my yard from the previous year, and I had it very, very small. The caliper on it was only the size of my finger. And last year, I didn't water until August 10th because I was out of town. I didn't want to turn on the irrigation and have a leak, so I never did. And then when I came back, I only watered 10 times last year. And this tree didn't even blink. It was good to go, and it is blooming. It didn't bloom this year, but it is growing tremendously well right now. And I've also started watering about once a week on it too. So which plant actually goes to the furthest extremes of the earliest and the latest in terms of the year? And right now, that's Panchito manzanita. Chieftain is also in there, and so is the mock bearberry. They're all Archistaphylos, and they're all wonderful. They have different sizes, basically, to them. The Panchito manzanita has these pink flowers, and I've seen them bloom back in November. They come on, and that offers some pollen for probably smaller bees and probably more crawling insects. to get in there because it kind of hangs upside down and it's a really small opening to get in there. But then they actually put on their show, and only if you're paying attention are you really going to see them. You won't be able to see them from far away. You need to get up closer, but they're beautiful. But the reason this plant is really, for me, a Colorado game changer is because of its style. It reflects sort of this mountain style, and it's different than boxwood that you see out east. The broadleaf evergreen with caramel branches, and it can get like 3 feet wide. It only gets a couple feet, maybe 1.5 feet tall, but this is a fantastic plant for Colorado, and you can use it on slopes in very, very hot areas. Some people think, oh, it's related to kinnikinick, so we have to put it in shaded areas, and that's just not true. I am fairly sure that when this is established, it won't need any water at all in some of the hottest areas. Anyway, this is a fantastic plant for style, and in place of using rocks, let's say, instead of buying boulders, this fills that spot because it's green all year round. Then the other one that's really early, I just love Daphnes. This plant was released in 1997, promoted by Plant Select. It was a cultivar that was actually found in Carol Mackey's yard out in New York. The gardener found it. It's a variegated broadleaf evergreen, but in cold winters, it can actually drop its leaves and then put them back on and still bloom. When I first saw this plant, I thought, oh my gosh, I got to put it on the east side of a building. I got to protect it. I have to shade it out. And in reality, it can grow out in the medians. So this here is actually at the Gardens on Spring Creek, and that was, I believe, this spring in April. These will bloom before your lilacs, and they have a wonderful smell. They stay small. I've seen people, let's just put it this way, they can get 3 to 4 feet, and I consider that fairly small. But I've seen them put these in places where they're next to sidewalks and then they shear them and they still do okay. But this is a very tough plant. You could get away with watering it twice a week, maybe only once a week. But anyway, Carol Mackey Daphne starts to bring on a lot more of the pollinators because it's bigger, and it'll go for about 3 to 4 weeks of blooming. Now, I put this up front because it's a shrub. And it's one I wanted to mention because it's important for natives to be offering all the information about, offering the native insects and bees that we don't have all the information on. This is kind of like the catch-all, you know. I think that science thinks they know everything, but one of the things we know least about in Colorado are native bees. And so this is a great little small shrub that's going to get 2.5 feet wide and, you know, 15 inches tall. And it blooms in the fall, and it blooms like all August all the way into October. It attracts tons of butterflies and bees. It's a fantastic little shrub. It doesn't need any water ultimately, and it has blue foliage through the summer, which is fantastic. And in early spring, what I normally do is I trim it back with some hedge trimmers that are very short. And I just trim it back so that it doesn't go to seed all over. And it's a fantastic xeric plant. So if you go to that big spreadsheet, the spreadsheet that you can download is 27 pages long. So I only picked some of these plants. One I didn't think about, are they available? Because they're probably not. I think people have been selling out. But I thought, you know, these are the colors, and these are proven plants that we promoted long ago. This viola, the Corsican violet, is a fantastic perennial violet that we can grow here and on minimal water. It does grow best in shade. It does not like being in full sun in the heat during the summertime. But as you can look down in the corner, it blooms really from March all the way to the end of the year. It's not heavy blooming all the time. You'll get the heavy blooms at the beginning and at the end, and it will seed around a little bit. Now, obviously, if you have more of a traditional kind of cottage or garden Victoria garden that gets a little bit more water, it's going to look a lot better for a lot longer. But this is a wonderful plant. You can actually buy it in seed packets and spread it around if you'd like. Anyway, just a great little pansy, kind of perennial pansy. And this plant is from South Africa. And I mention this plant because it has some significance from a study. This is the Cape Forget-Me-Not, or Anchusa capensis. It has very, very small flowers. They're blue as can be. It only gets to about 20 inches tall. But it blooms for a long time. It comes up in May, and then it just keeps blooming, and you get a lot of seed heads, and it'll actually travel around. So if you have this plant like on the front of a border, where you kind of want to have it up closer anyway, because when you're walking by, you get to see the color a little bit better and a little bit more detail in the flowers. You also get to see all the activities of the bees and things going on there. Because if you look on that picture on the right, I guess there's only 2 bees, but I thought there was more than that. But this plant can take it fairly drought tolerant. And this brings up another thing I always like to mention too, is plants that move around are actually good. They're good to have in proportion to the rest of your garden, because you always have spots that, it's hard to fill in, or, you can't find the right plant for that spot. And then all of a sudden, these other ones, these biennials, moon carrot or something like this, will come up and pop up. And if you recognize it when it's small and don't weed it out, you can have a whole new little population of those things growing in a new spot. And that'll open up maybe another premier spot in your garden. It's a fantastic plant, very drought tolerant, like I said. But the reason I put this one in was because in 2016, 17, and 18, Plant Select actually sponsored one of the professors here at CSU, and Lisa Mason actually was the grad student, and now she's a CSU extension down in Arapahoe. And she was doing a native bee watch using the citizen science kind of methodology. And she's published some books on this, or this is the book that is the guide to actually documenting which bees are visiting and things like that, the plants. But she should have this published on the CSU website, and I didn't find it yet, but I have some of her documentation, so I haven't gone there and searched. But what she did was every week, I believe it was every week, she had citizen volunteers come out and monitor which bees were landing on and visiting some of the Plant Select plants up here at the trial gardens. And what she found was this sort of information, where honeybees are obviously not native, but they are the most prominent out there, and they're the ones that are visiting the flowers the most. Bumblebees are all native. I just mentioned that, Colorado has over 900 native bees to Colorado, and 461 of those have actually been identified in the county of Larimer alone. That's a big deal, and people just don't know where they go. A lot of them are solitary. It's hard to identify and distinguish between them. But anyway, there's the hairy leg bees. Those are also, I think almost all those are native. The green metallic bees are, the striped bees are, the striped sweat bees, and the tiny dark bees. Anyway, all those are. But that Cape Forget-Me-Not, you can see, had the highest number of bees visits over on the right-hand side at 109 in 2016 and 197 in 2017. So the one that had the most, I think the native bees, was actually something like that Echinacea tennesseeensis, which is a native plant to, obviously, outside of Nashville. But anyway, so when you think about plants, you want to think about the native things and how things co-evolve, but at the same time, insects are not co-evolving with irrigation. And so we're inviting a lot of insects into our neighborhoods, and we need to provide them with food. And this is a Plant Select plant that we're promoting this year. It's Thermopsis lupinoides. It's golden candles. And I have to say, it's been one of my most favorite plants since working at Denver Botanic Gardens, because it was one of the earliest plants to bloom. It blooms in late April and it'll go into May to Mother's Day. It can grow quite large to about 2, almost 3 feet, but when it comes on and it blooms, everybody worries, oh, it's going to freeze. Oh, this plant seems to know what's going to go on, and it just blooms at the right time and gives you that warmth right after that last snow. But at any rate, I bring it up because there are other thermopsids that are native to Colorado and native to Montana and Carolina and all that, but they don't behave in the urban settings like we want them to. And I think it's sort of a disservice to provide somebody with a native plant that they actually can't manage, instead of providing maybe a look-alike plant that you'd hope the native insects and birds and butterflies would recognize as possibly native and then be able to utilize it. So, I mean, that's a big discussion, but I put it out there as this is a great plant because it doesn't go to seed and it doesn't run, and it just comes out at the perfect time. It's in the legume family, so the grasshoppers happen to love it. It'll put on seeds. You can trim the seed heads off. You could do that right now because it's already making little itty bitty seed pods like snap peas. And anyway, you can trim those off and then you'll just have foliage for the rest of the year. And that's it for that plant. But man, when it comes on, it's absolutely gorgeous. Amsonia jonesii. This is a fantastic Plant Select plant, promoted this a long time ago. And I think this is one reason a lot of people think Plant Select's about natives. And we are pushing a lot of natives, but this one is fantastic. It's a quick, drought tolerant. You don't need to water it. It can take part shade. It'll only get to about 20, 24 inches tall, but it'll bloom for a couple weeks. And it has this white sort of inner petal, and then it has a darker purple back on the back side of the throat, on the back side of the flower, and it makes it look a lot more blue. But you can see that it blooms in May. The rest of the year, it doesn't do much except stay as sort of a green blob, and in the fall, it just turns kind of a brown color, and that's it. But it is a drought-tolerant, fantastic plant that's native to mostly the western slope and the plateaus over there. Then we also have Narbonne blue flax. I hope that people have been out looking at these. Now Colorado has a native flax that's it's the Linum lewisii, and this is from the southern France. And there is a slight difference with this one in terms of its growth habit. So the native one is more vase-shaped for us, but this one is more mound, and it's round and it's mounded. It'll grow to 1.5 feet tall. The flowers are actually a little bit more striking, if you ask me, because there's a little bit more purple in them. They're a little more silvery like colors to them. They attract a lot of bees, and it's really nice that they actually I think they sort of sucker, and then they also drop seed within their vicinity. And if you got to be careful in the years following, because I've gone through just weeding, thinking I would recognize what a baby flax looks like, and I didn't. And I weeded out a whole bunch of them. And this will make a small little meadow of flowers, which is fantastic. And it'll bloom for about 4 weeks. The flowers themselves don't last that long, only a day or two, but then it just keeps putting on more and more flowers. Fantastic plant. And this is another native plant, which I truly love. This one is wine cups. And it's funny because if you drive out east, you find these in people's lawns and they just mow them down. But this is a Calero in Volcreta. This is native mostly to the Midwest and to the prairies. And it just is one of those creepers. It has a huge taproot, and it can slightly go to seed, but not as often as you'd probably like. Here it is pictured at the Gardens on Spring Creek, where it's really placed well right next to the walk, where it just loves the heat. And so the taproot is up in the rocks, and it's just going down, and you don't have to water this once it's established. And then come June, you'll start to see these very fuchsia flowers that are about 1.5 inches in diameter. And And it's kind of a vining thing. It doesn't ever set out runners on those leaves that come out and on those stems that come out. So you could use this also on slopes, and I kind of like to put it where it can intermingle with other plants. That could be roses, that can be lavender, that could be a whole bunch of other things. Because what I found about this, most challenging about this plant, is it's kind of, as a maintenance person, it's hard to maintain and make it look good once you're done. Because once you start pruning it off, it just kind of looks like an octopus. As you see all the stems coming out, and you're like, oh, it doesn't form a muffin. But having it cascade through other plants is one of the best things for it. So, and as you can tell, it just loves heat. So all these plants too, I haven't mentioned anything about zones, just because all these plants are zone hardy here. Now the person I saw somebody say they're way up at 76, you're up on Boulder on the south side of Sugarloaf Mountain. And so that is a different kind of thing. So you're gonna wanna look at those zones, but this one's a zone 3 plant. It'll probably grow up that high. But anyway, about the zones too, you know, when we start to think about climate change and things like that, if things are really changing, you know, I think I look a lot towards plants that survive closer to Albuquerque now as plants that we may need out in our landscapes for the future. You know, obviously we got to be diverse and do a lot of different things, but those are the kinds of things that run through my head. So I don't mention all these zones because there are 3, 4, or 5, and all these plants are going to work in your neighborhood. Here's another fantastic plant. This is a great plant. This is the desert bearded tongue. Penstemons are a fantastic genus of species. And this one, it grows to about 30 inches tall. It just loves full sun. It's native down to the southwest corner of Colorado. Beautiful trumpet sort of flowers, which offer it for hawk moths and hummingbirds. And it's just about to come into bloom now at my house. Late May, June is when in Denver, but this plant is a native plant. It's xeric. You don't need to do anything. It will need sun. And when you think about this genus, dive deeper into it, because I can't remember how many species of penstemon there are, but there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are from Colorado. Anyway, that's a great plant. What else was I going to say about it? Oh, and you know what? It's deer resistant. Oh, that's what I was going to mention. So also what I did was, if you go to that downloadable designs, I just uploaded it today to that specific page. Go down to the bottom and you'll see Plant Select, Plant Smarter. There's a logo there, and click on that, and that'll download an Excel spreadsheet. That spreadsheet has 2 tabs on the bottom. One is for North American native plants, and the other is for international steppe plants. Now, on both of them, you can see I hyperlinked most of the plant names. I couldn't do them all because it gets a little confusing if they're hybrids and you don't know where you're supposed to have their real origin from. But that is such a useful document for thinking about where plants really are from. And there's 2 websites that I use. One is the USDA plants website. I use that one if the plant is actually only in the United States. And I like that website because you can zoom in on the map and it'll actually give you the counties where it's native to, if you want to go into that much detail. The other one is Plants Online, or Plants of the World Online, and that's supported by Q. Now they have a better world map of all these plants, and they're starting to show areas where they're introduced, which is pretty cool. But the big reason I use them is more for their nomenclature. The US government has started to defund some of these programs of the USDA, and so they don't keep up with all the changing names of things. And names change because of DNA testing. People and scientists find out these plants are more related to a different group of plants than they thought. Anyway, that Penstemon's fantastic. So I just love this kind of color, and I threw it in here because you need a break from just looking at 1 or 2 plants. This is actually in Boulder, down at the county fairgrounds. It's one of my most favorite gardens. It's so simple. Darren Davidson does a great job there. She hand waters this area. She has geranium in the center that's actually not plant select. She has some ice plant down there. That's Kellydes, the Mesa Verde. Fantastic. Ice plants are just sort of this, when they came on scene, they're very tropical, but they're very drought tolerant. They're so low maintenance. You don't do anything to them except divide them or replace them if they, get stepped on, or they get old and pass away. But those are great plants for an exotic look. Also in this picture, I don't know if my mouse works, and you can see it, but this is actually platinum sage. This is another one of my favorite plants that we won't talk about, but it's a very low growing ground cover with silver foliage, and then it puts up these salvia sagey looking flowers that are just stems that are just fantastic, and it'll bloom for about 2.5 weeks. Back here in the red is actually another North American native that just looks so tropical. That's the Hummingbird mint, and that one is in bloom right about now. It's not a long-lived perennial, but it is a showstopper. But why I show you that is really because that picture was taken right there on that same day. And I like the idea of us really working on these medians and spaces that are challenging and putting in a diverse amount of plants that are really fairly low maintenance. This is not a lot of maintenance. If that were a tree and lawn, you would have to mow that about 20 times a year, and you'd be using a lot of water. So anyway, that's just kind of I'd like to see more of that, and it's very beautiful. So the Valley Lavender, Plains Verbena, this one's a hard one to find, and I think that you might be able to find it in Garden in a Box, to be honest with you. This is a plant that was brought to Plant Select by Little Valley Wholesale Nursery that grows all the plants for Garden in the Box. And they brought it, it's a very darker purple. It's actually a native. You can find it just walking around on the plains. The color can be from a light pink to a darker purple, but look how long it blooms. It's more of a ground cover. It just covers the ground, only about 6 inches tall at tops. But it's perfect for along borders, along sidewalks. You can trim it so that it branches out more, so that you have a fuller look. Otherwise, sometimes it can get a little bit open, but this will put on blooms all through the year, all the way into end of September. And this also has a different flower structure. So when you're thinking about the pollinators too, you want to think about, do we have, the composites? Do we have umbel flowers? Do we have the trumpet kind of shaped flowers? And you will look through this whole thing and you can see that that's what we're offering all the pollinators out there. And then of course, we have the Denver daisy. Now the Denver daisy is Rudbeckia hirta. It was a plant that was promoted back, I forgot now, 2008, I can't remember. There was an event. I was at Denver Botanic Gardens, and this is what they decided to promote. And everybody thought it was a perennial at first, but it's not. It's kind of mildly hardy. If you plant 10 of them, the next year only about 3 will show up. But annuals are very important in the garden, if you ask me. The reason is August is a tough year for making your garden look good, and that's what annuals are for. This Denver daisy is going to bloom from July all the way till frost. It's going to offer all sorts of food for every kind of pollinator there is, and it's just a fantastic plant. It gets 18 to 28 inches tall, easy to maintain. You can count on just planting it every year though, and just saving that spot out for this plant. It's a moderate waterer. It's not a xeric plant, but it's okay. And this is actually a North American native out east, so that genus species. Now I put this in here to remind me of some things, because Tom Throgmorton used to do a program on NPR, and this is his field of trees. And I went and visited him a little bit ago, and all those trees to the left of him are a tree that he has to grub out, which means he's killing all those trees. And the reason is that it has a fungus or a blight of some sort that is swelling the branches, and those branches then break real easily in the snow. And there's a vector of one of the insects that come into it. It's not a foreign disease. It actually happens in ponderosa pines, but I put this picture in to remind people that, you know, people that grow plants kill a lot of plants and they get frustrated when those plants die. So it's important that we buy those plants up when we see them available if you're interested in those plants, because if they're not selling, they don't want them. And if they have any kind of trouble like this, he's not considering that he may not grow this Arnold Sentinel ever again in his property. So I put that in there, and I want to remind you too that the water, you know, when we water all the time, we're going to just make habitats. When I grew up, I remember going to Indiana just to see the praying mantis. Now I don't go a day without seeing eggs and little babies and everything. But anyway, that's Tom Throgmorton. So then we also have Sonoran Sunset. The Agastache is a great plant from northern Mexico, and there's hybrids of it. This is Sonoran Sunset, and I think last year was one of the best years I've ever seen this plant. It just showed off. You probably recognize it. This Sonoran Sunset, the Agastache canna, is probably the longest lived of the hyssops that we offer, and it has this beautiful sort of pink purple flower that stays up above the foliage. And when you work with this plant, it just smells almost like licorice. It's so fantastic. It comes in the fall and it'll bloom for several weeks. Just a fantastic, you know, smaller plant, 20 inches tall, but obviously it's a real winner. If it's a real winner, you should get one of these for sure. Then there's also this one here, the sunset hyssop. This is the straight species for the most part. It's Agastache rupestris from Arizona and Mexico. And this one is a shorter lived plant, but has such great fragrance. You'll want to have it in your yard. It gets to 24 inches tall. It's a little more open. It will seed around, which is fantastic. So it'll come on in July, and it'll just bloom the rest of the year, throwing up spikes of flowers like this. So this is another crony of mine who I really adore. This is Jerry Nelson. He lives in Greeley. This is his yard, and he is on, I think, 13th and I can't remember. It's downtown. And this is one of his.
14th.
Where is
14th Avenue. He's right off 14th Avenue.
Yes. So every time I'm in Greeley, I always visit his garden because he has one of the best pollinator gardens I've ever seen. And I can't put the video up, but I stopped by on this day and he was working in it. And the butterflies were everywhere. I had never seen that many at his house. And this is a fairly new garden. I think it's only 2 or 3 years old for him. And it's right in the median between the street and the hell strip between the street and the sidewalk. But he has, you can kind of see the baby blue rabbit brush starting to come on there. And then all those little white things, those are zinnias. That's zinnia profusion, I believe. And that is a great annual plant because it looks wild, but it's an annual and it just blooms all the time. It's so fantastic. At any rate, Jerry Nelson is one of the best designers I've ever met, and he's just a fantastic guy. You guys are in Greeley are really blessed to have him around. So then we also have the chocolate flower. You can't go anywhere without mentioning chocolate as a dessert. And so this was another native that I wanted to mention because it's true. This thing in the evening and in the morning on still, when the air is sort of still, you will smell a Hershey's chocolate bar. And this plant just keeps throwing up these little yellow flowers. It kind of gets tall at first, and then it lays over and it kind of makes a mound. It'll seed around, which I think is great, just because it's a fantastic plant. And guess what? If you don't like it, I'd rather in that spot, I'd rather weed flowers than actual weeds. But this grows native out on the plains. Very tough plant. Anyway, I love it. And you can see down at the bottom, it blooms all the way from June till September. It's fantastic. Then, of course, here's another North American native up to Idaho and Northern California, orange hummingbird trumpet. So this is a funny plant because I've watched a lot of properties, rental properties up here at CSU, and you know, they will redo the landscapes and you'll get people that are really interested in their plants for a little while for the 2 years that they live here, and then they leave and the next person doesn't take care of it. This is one of the plants I always see for years after people leave. It is a tough plant. It's a great plant, but it blooms really late in the fall. And so, you know, in July and August, it's sometimes doesn't have a great show because we can get freezer cold in September. And so it shortens that bloom time. But this is a ground cover and it just keeps creeping out. It grows only, what, 6 inches tall, and it has sort of an orange flower to it. But it's great for, like that, or you can see crawling over rocks, or just flat areas along borders. But full sun is where it wants to be. If you try and put it under a tree, it'll run away. So that's pretty much the plants that I just went through and picked because they kind of illustrate how you can go through this PDF of data and align things. So here's where you can kind of see in the spring, you have that large group of purple off to the left, indicating January, February, some of those things bloomed. You know, that was the Arctostaphylos. And then as you go down, the purple starts to move across the summer. And you can see little spikes where you can have plants that only bloom for a week or two, but that color in contrast with something that's blooming for a lot longer is a fantastic way to look at your garden and really dial in the aesthetic appeal of it. You know, and here is like the other ones as you move through. These are all the plants that I kind of put in, and as it moves all the way across just to the end of the season, I think that anybody can plan a pollinator garden very easily using this sort of method, and all the research is out there, or all the data is out there that you need to grow what you'd like. And I want everybody to keep growing plants, work hard in their yard, and share plants. This community is really special in terms of sharing, and we're all battling the same things. It's bad weather, it's hail, it's insects and things like that. And to share plants, when you visit that plant again, you always remember where you got it from. You always remember who gave it to you. And so every spring, it's like visiting your friends. And during this COVID season, that's what I needed. So I visited all my friends. I'd say, oh, that's from Colette at Nick's. I love that thing. Anyway, so I didn't mention anything about grasses. Of course, you go into the fall, you need some of those structures. Grasses are fantastic. This is Chatfield Gardens, Lauren Springer design. She's phenomenal at doing prairies. Prairies are the hardest thing to maintain, if you ask me, because you maintain and look good. And then you have the winter. And when you go through and think about plants for the winter, this is at my house, this is the Russian hawthorn. Very drought tolerant, super great, like minimize how much you water it, to be honest with you, once it's established. It has these berries that around Thanksgiving, I cut branches off and bring them in for the table because they're so gorgeous. The leaves are thick and just beautiful. They can turn orange, but the berries are a very beautiful red. And I see the robins actually, the robins don't leave anymore in the wintertime, and they sit here and they eat this plant at my house. And that's it. And then I put this slide in because I wanted to remind people, for larger projects, if you're working with HOA properties, there's grants out there. If you're in Northern Colorado, I think Northern Water has one of the biggest grants. They'll match up $15,000. You have to apply for it. Greeley offers, I think, Turf for Cash program, and you can double up all these grants. So you could save water. You can choose a great selection of pollinators for that area, and you could get actually some money for it. And so I encourage everybody to actually act now, because if we ever run into a drought, that's going to be an issue. And if, for those that are new here, you know, Colorado is one of 2 states where water only flows out of the state. There's not a major river. There's no rivers that flow into the state. So we rely all on snowpack. The other state is actually Hawaii. So of course, no rivers run into it. So it's really important that we are water conscious, because if things change, we need to have properties that aren't, or landscapes that aren't going to fail. And that's, I think, all I had. I do have a guide of plants. I didn't show the big book that Ruth has. That's a fantastic book with 135 plants. It's eye candy. The pictures are huge and beautiful. I put this one up just because you can get it at Happy Life or Eaton Grove if you're in the Greeley area. And you can actually order it online. If you want me to mail it to you, that's fine too. But it has all of our plants all the way through 2020, and it just gives a little picture for a brief description. So thanks for listening to me. I hope I didn't go over, and everybody have a good night. And I'm around for questions. You can also email me.